this is going to be great.
Welcome to the White House Pod with David A.R. White.
You're not going to believe who we have on this show. I am so excited. I mean, there are so many pages here about what he has done in his life, and I have the unbelievable honor of knowing him for several years and being on his show, watching him run for president, and watching him on Fox News like a lot. Yeah. And then we just had him in God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. So, Governor Huckabee, thank you so much for being here. It is an honor, and you are an amazing individual, and I don't even know where to start here. How are you, first of all?
David, I'm doing great. Listen, that wonderful introduction. I kept looking around thinking, who's he talking to? I thought I was on the show, and this guy he's describing greatly exceeds my capacity, but I'm thrilled to get to visit with you. I love what you do. So grateful for the extraordinary commitment you have made to producing fantastic films that the entire family can watch, that are wholesome, uplifting, and inspirational. And it's a real gift to the world. And thank God for what you're doing. Just a joy to get to visit with you.
Thank you. I'm always weirded out. I don't know if you have the same problem. I'm weirded out on compliments, and I don't know how to accept them sometimes, other than just take the bouquet of flowers. I remember my early memory of you was obviously when you were running for president. I'm trying to remember what years that was.
Probably 2008 the first time. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you know how well that turned out. I mean, I'm really real successful at that. So
the country forever has been changed and altered because they didn't make the right decision. I saw you. We were speaking. You were the main speaker in Orange County years and years ago. I'm trying to remember what I got some kind of award for something there. When I met you first, I was amazed because you walked in. I always tell this. The people are like, how is Governor Huckabee? Like, they want to know. Everybody wants to know, how are you, right? And off camera, off the podcast, in between takes, like, what's the real you like? And I was amazed because when we were at that event, you walked in and you met every single worker that was working that event. And furthermore, you knew their names, and you knew their names all evening. And you would call out and say, Jose, how are you? Throughout the evening. And you complimented them more than I'd ever seen anybody ever do. And that was just a testament to who you are and to your character. And also just even, I don't know where I was whether I was starting to speak out or not, but I also was amazed at that and learned a great deal from that, and I think anybody who goes out and is talking in front of an audience or whatever, it's not necessarily the audience that matters the most. It's the people who are running the whole thing and putting together, and the workers behind the scenes that never get any credit.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. To me, it's pretty natural. I grew up as the guy that really had more in common with the people working in the kitchen than the folks sitting at the head table. And I tell people I had to learn how to sit at the head table. I had to learn how to go to a restaurant because I didn't grow up like that. I grew up poor. I grew up, just in a working class family.
In Hope, Arkansas?
In Hope, Arkansas. And I did not feel comfortable being around people who were important, people who were in the spotlight. And if you'd have told me as a kid, well, one day you'll be in the spotlight, you'll be that person on the stage, I'd have said, no way I could ever do that. I'm too bashful. I don't want to be around people. They'll make fun of me. I don't have what they have. And so I try never to forget where I came from. And I'm not ashamed of it. I'm grateful to God for where I came from because it really helped to formulate my idea about the world and everything else. But I know it'll sound hard to believe, but I still find myself sometimes uncomfortable in a room of people where I think everybody here is a whole lot more important than me. And man, I hope I don't mess up and say something stupid or do something stupid, embarrass the people who are with me. And, it's just part of the makeup of who I am and what I deal with every day.
How is that, though? I mean, because You never say anything stupid. Like I mean, do you have a memory
Ask my
of
wife?
well, okay. I was, but like in public, have you ever said anything that you go back and you go, oh, you know what? I wish that I wouldn't have said something like that. I'm just saying this because I've seen you, I've seen you in different places. I've never, from the event that I first met you at to you were in God's Not Dead 2 on that production, and then to the, even you were doing, I think you were running for president somewhere around that time where you were doing screenings even of God's Not Dead 2, right, to what we just shot, to being on your show. And I never, ever, even to watching you on Fox and, so many different things. And I never, ever see you say anything out. Like, you're funny, you're charming, you're smart. Everything that comes out of your mouth is so well thought out, it seems.
Other people regret that I've said. I rarely say something that I regret because I have the attitude, if I didn't mean it, I wouldn't have said it. Now, there are times I've said things that were totally misunderstood, misinterpreted, or even misrepresented. That happens. But I don't go around apologizing for stuff that somebody else didn't understand. I've said stuff that probably wasn't real temperate. I've probably blurted out stuff that maybe wasn't ideal. But, I'm not a person that goes around wringing my hands over who I am or what I believe. And I feel like that there's an authenticity that matters a whole lot more than being careful. And I think sometimes in the world, people are too protective and careful. And that to me comes across as being phony. And I don't ever want to be that. I want to be who I am. And if I mess up, I mess up. And I just say, happy that there's grace of God. Because if there's not grace from you or someone else, at least he knows me best. He'll love me the most and forgive me in spite of it. So life goes on.
How did you? I love that you were a pastor.
Yeah.
Did you feel my dad's a pastor, or was a pastor, right? So growing up as a pastor's kid, obviously I saw, and then I went to Moody Bible Institute for a year, where my entire family had graduated, and met their significant others there. But I was dropout, of course, after a year because I had to go to Hollywood. But where did you get the call? Do you feel like you had the call of God on your life to be a pastor at that time? And how old were you when you felt that? And how did you get into that?
My first career was actually in broadcasting, radio and television and advertising. I ran an ad agency. I worked in Christian television, which was what I thought was going to be my career. And it was sort of my plan that I laid out. I would get involved in Christian broadcasting and eventually run for public office. And I started in radio when I was 14 years old. That's how I worked my way through junior high, high school, college, and grad school. And I was a disc jockey, sportscaster, all those things, and loved broadcasting. And it was a terrific experience. I mean, God just opened that door for me. When I was a kid, 14, I'd get a key to the radio station. I'd open the radio station, sign it on, work. But that's how I had stuff. It's how I paid my way through school, because I had to pay for it. There was no one in the family who could write that check. Again, it was a great benefit, but my first career was in that era. I was asked to come speak at a church, and I did. They said, hey, would you come and be our interim pastor, because we don't have one? I said, yeah, I could do that. Run my ad business on one side, and on weekends show up at that church. And I said, when you guys find your pastor, just let me know, and I'll, graciously leave.
How old were you at that time?
I was 25.
Okay.
And they came to me and said, we found our pastor. I said, great. When's my last Sunday? He said, well, that's what we want to talk to you about. We think you are our pastor. And I said, oh, no. No, thank you. I love Jesus and I want to serve him. And, that's very important to me. But I don't think I'm cut out to be a full-time pastor. And they said, well, pray about it. That's a dangerous thing when people ask you to do that and you take them up on it. And the next thing you know, I'm a pastor for the next almost 12 years. 6 in one church and 6 years in another.
In Arkansas, or where?
In Arkansas.
Arkansas, okay.
Puyallup, Arkansas, and then Texarkana, Arkansas. And I look at it as God's graduate school for me. It was where I really understood a level of humanity. And you being a pastor's kid certainly will recognize this, but a lot of people don't. When you are a pastor, you can put a name and a face on every social pathology that exists in the world. If there's a pregnant teenager who hasn't even told her parents, the first person she may tell is her pastor. If there is an elderly couple who are having to cut their medicine in half because they can't afford the full dose, the pastor may be the only person who knows that. If there's a young couple whose child dies and they're struggling whether to keep their marriage together, the pastor is the one who's going to be there to hold their hand. And it's the pastor at 2 a.m. who's going to be holding the hand of an elderly person who is slipping into eternity as the family stands around the bed in ICU. The pastor knows things about people in the church that no one else knows, talks to people. He understands what it is to be hungry because he's in the homes of the people who don't have any food. He's the one who brings the box of food into their home. He's the person who recognizes what pornography addiction does to people. I could go through the whole list, but my point being that while a lot of people, when I first got into politics, said, you're a pastor, what do you know? And I'm thinking, I bet I know more about human life than you do, because I honestly can put the name and a face of every human issue that we look at in our culture today. So I viewed that not only as an opportunity to serve the Lord, and really it was a wonderful experience, wouldn't trade it for anything. But I also look back and realize that it was an extraordinary education to learn how to deal with people, how to confront the problems that people were having, and to learn to love people that frankly did some things that made them hard to love. But that's part of it as well.
Did you know, so you were there 12 years. When did you marry your wife? When did your...
We married in May of 1974, which means we're coming up on our 50th anniversary.
Wow.
And I know what you should say is, my gosh, you don't look that old. Thank you very much. We married when we were 12, but in Arkansas, that's considered being a late bloomer. So it's okay. We actually did get married. We were 18, a few months shy of our 19th birthday. She's a July birthday. I'm an August birthday. So we were incredibly young, but both of us grew up having to accept an enormous level of responsibility when we were young. So I think I don't want to say we were more mature than a lot of people our age, but we probably were. She grew up one of 5 children in a single parent home. Her mom raised 5 of them. I grew up in a home where I had to take on responsibility at a very young age for anything I wanted. It wasn't that my parents didn't want to provide, they just didn't have the means to do it. And they taught me what it was to work hard and be responsible. And that was a gift from God that I had that.
Were you oldest or youngest or in the middle?
I was the youngest. There were only 2 in my family. I have an older sister, 2 years older. But anyway, married for 50 years, 3 adult children. Our first year into marriage, my wife was diagnosed with spinal cancer, which is quite a shock to be a college student, freshly married, thinking the world is going to be wonderful. And because you love the Lord, you're not going to have any real challenges. And then she's diagnosed with a malignancy in the canal of her spine and originally told probably wouldn't live through it. And if they could even get to the tumor, she would probably be paralyzed from the waist down, because to excise the tumor meant scraping it away from the spinal cord, which would have severed it. And that was, here we were barely 20 at that point.
Wow.
And faced with that. But you look back and you realize all the experiences that we go through in life are part of the process where God teaches us, develops us, toughens us. And, we were told we would never have children. She had to have, after the surgery, radiation therapy, which in that time, 1975, is pretty primitive. Radiation was basically microwaving your insides, and it was not the sophisticated process that it is today. And because of it, they said we'd never have children. Well, much to their surprise, we had 3 children. We lost one between our first and the second, but kids that we weren't supposed to have, one of them ended up becoming the governor of Arkansas now. So you look at those experiences and you say, God is good. And it doesn't mean that God is good, that God releases us from troubles and challenges. He doesn't. You go through it. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Jesus said the sun shines on the just and the unjust. Well, that's just a reality. So it doesn't mean you escape anything. It just means that you are given the power and the grace to go through it. Not around it, not over it, not under it, but right through the middle of it.
Did she get better from the surgery?
It was a struggle. Yeah, she had the surgery. We really were not optimistic, and we're not given a reason to be optimistic by the neurosurgeon. And he was very pleased that it had turned out that she survived it. And he said, we don't know whether she can walk, and we'll have to just wait and see. Can she move her toes and her feet? And when she did, that was just an answer to prayer. And then the radiation therapy, she pretty much had to learn to walk all over again. It was a process. And I'll be honest with you, David, there were periods where I just prayed, Lord, let us have a miracle. Let us have just a wonderful moment in which it just, whoa, she's instantly healed and everything is fine. And I really wanted that. And I thought, what a great testimony we would have if that could happen. Then I realized that if that happened, it would be so out of the norm, because most people who are told you've got cancer, you may not live, they don't have an instant miraculous healing. Some of them die, and some of them, they get better, but it takes months, if not years. And if you have that experience, then the people that don't have it are feeling like, wow.
Why didn't I get it?
Their life not good. And I think it's important for believers to go through life, and then we are able to live what's said in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, that you comfort others with the same comfort wherewith you have been comforted. If you've experienced grace in an area of your life, you are capable then of sharing that grace and sharing that experience with others who are going through it. And it has a whole lot more credibility than to go to somebody's hospital bed and say, well, if you just pray, God will instantly heal you and you'll jump up out of this bed and do cartwheels down the hospital hallway. Probably you won't.
Has she struggled with that throughout your entire marriage, or did she come out of the other side of it then and it subsided?
She's had a remarkable life, and especially in her young adult life, she did, everything from horseback riding to bungee jumping, parachuted from an airplane with the Golden Knight parachute team from the U.S. Army. So she's lived a very active life. Now, over the years, there are effects. She's had neuropathy in her feet. She's had some serious issues, both knees replaced. Biggest problem she has is that the scar tissue, which was very intense in her back, created some long-term issues in terms of just mobility.
Yeah.
So, that's part of it. But I think our perspective is, rather than say, oh, how awful it is that she's dealing with neuropathy or the scar tissue and the pain and sometimes the debilitating difficulty from that, look at it as, my gosh, she's had 50 years almost since that time, 49 since that all happened, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a very active, fulfilled life, and she's active now. She may not be as fast or as quick, but I don't think she would tell you, oh, my life has been miserable because I've had some aches and pains. She would say, what a blessing. I've outlived what I was told I would be able to do when I was 20 years old. So again, it's perspective. And God hasn't promised us a life that is easy. He's just promised us that whatever we go through, we don't have to go it alone.
Well, we should just we can say our final prayer here and let everybody go after this. Amazing. All right. So where Where do we go from here? When you're 12 years in the ministry, right? And politics, I assume, comes knocking on your door. Somebody is like, "Oh my gosh, have you been to his church? That man's amazing. We should have him run our state." How does the segue happen there?
It was a dream deep in my heart since I was a child, but I didn't think it would happen. And then once I transitioned into the role of a pastor, I assumed, well, no one would ever accept me running for office, having been a pastor. And there were some that didn't. Interestingly, it wasn't the people outside the church who were most maybe critical against that whole idea. It was the people inside the church. And I would hear this, David, well, you've just left your calling. And I said, my calling is to follow Jesus. You don't think I can do that beyond getting a check from a church? Is a vocational pastor the only form of serving God we have left? I never believed that. I still don't. It's about following Christ, not necessarily a particular vocation. But there were some, people. There were some people who were pretty harsh, and again, almost all of them inside the church, and there was far less pushback from me running for office from secular people than there was from the people who were, and I won't even say spiritual because I'm not sure they were, but they were church people. Did someone come to you to say, "Hey, you should do this," or like how did you decide to go? Because I take it you ran for lieutenant governor. Is that what's the difference between lieutenant governor and governor? Just for those folks out there that didn't quite make it through 10th grade. Pilot. Lieutenant governor in Arkansas is elected separately from the governor. And the primary job, you preside over the Senate, and if something happens to the governor, you become governor. Well, in my case, something did happen to the governor. He got convicted of felonies, had to resign, and I became the governor. It was quite an experience. And again, the whole process was out of my control. But there were people who did come to me during my years as a pastor, and I was elected to be president of the state denomination that I was in. It was a high-profile position. And there were people who said, "Have you ever thought about running for office?" Well, that was strange that they would say that, because normally you wouldn't say that to a pastor. But what they didn't know was that was buried deep within my heart and had been for most all of my life. And so, once again, I started asking friends and people I trusted and people that I believed would be honest with me. And I was shocked that many of them said, "I wondered when you were going to say yes to this, because I've always thought that's what you should be doing." And so
Did you struggle with this? Like, I love obviously our podcast is called Dare to Dream, right? And so we try to dig into people's dreams and how and where and how do they come out with that or in the process of it, right? And so when you had that dream that was inside of you in the middle of your ministry, let's just say the second 6 years. Mm-hmm. Did you feel, was it like something, kind of like in the Bible where I feel like it was it Solomon? It wasn't Solomon. Who would say, get up, and come out?
Elijah.
Was it Elijah? Where God was coming to him in the dreams?
Certainly Elijah did. Also Samuel.
It was Samuel. I'm talking about Samuel. That's who I was talking about.
He told him to wake up.
Right.
And he to Eli and said, "What did you want?" And Eli said, "I didn't call you." And that was the reference point for that.
Did you feel like, even in that last 6 years of the ministry, did you feel like you were being called more and more towards that, or pulled, so to speak? What was the turning point for you?
It was probably in the latter years of my second pastorate, when I became president of the denomination, because I had sort of buried the idea that it would ever happen, even though I still had a lot of interest in political things. I had interest in current events, and that was still a very important part of my life. But I just thought I would not be able to participate. But in the latter part of the pastorate, when people started coming to me and encouraging it and asking, had I thought about it? Would I consider it? That's when it started becoming a possibility. And I love the phrase "dare to dream," because dreaming means that you have an idea, a vision within your soul, but it still requires a decision. Dreaming doesn't make it happen. Deciding and doing makes it happen. And that is a risk. And I think sometimes people are risk averse, especially when it comes to their spiritual lives, and they don't want people to criticize them, and they don't want to fail. Hey, I don't want to fail. Nobody does. But you have to be willing to fail in order to succeed. And part of accomplishing anything is daring not to dream. That's a first step. Then it's daring to decide, and then it's daring to do what you've decided to do, realizing it could turn into an absolute mess. But if you're not willing to do that and take the risk, you'll never have the reward.
Yeah, so profound. All right, so how hard was it a landslide, the first political race that you got in to be lieutenant governor?
It was very close. No Republican had been elected in my state in a generation, only 3 in the history of the state. So for me to run as a Republican was audacious, to say the least. And nobody thought I had a chance. My opponent outspent me 20-1. We ran a very low-key grassroots campaign. But everything just lined up, and it was an amazing experience. So many people really wanted this election to happen, and it was a challenge. I challenged what I call the political machine of Arkansas, that had ground people into the ground, and people understood that. They really did. They felt like that there was an elitist group that ran government, made all the decisions, and then there were the working stiffs that just took it on the chin. And I think by speaking into that, it captured the attention who didn't care that I was a Republican, because I was speaking not just to them, I was speaking for them. And it was a shock to the Arkansas political system when I won in a special election for lieutenant governor that happened, by the way, because Bill Clinton was elected president. The lieutenant governor became governor, replacing Clinton, and there was an opening for lieutenant governor. So I ran, and that's how it happened. And then 3 years after that, I was reelected the following year. But 3 years after I was first elected, the governor was convicted of felonies, had to resign. I became governor and served almost 11 years, all of his term, or biggest part of his term, and 2 terms of my own.
It sounds a lot like a story to a movie that we recently shot.
Yeah.
Mine does a couple things, but
yeah, it does. No, in fact, when I heard about the plot, I'm thinking, yeah, I understand this one. It really does make sense to me.
You're like, did they just steal my life story, for crying out loud?
Hey.
All right, so you're governor. You ran for president. In what years was this? How long had you been the governor at this point?
Well, I had been governor all my term. I did not run until I'd finished my term. And I believe very strongly that if you're elected to a job, you need to finish that job because you asked for it. And so I didn't run for president until 2008. I was governor through January of 2007 and did not announce candidacy for that until my term was completely finished. And I feel, as I say, very strongly that if you want to run for something other than the office you hold, you should resign the office you have and run for something. But don't take advantage of the taxpayers who give you a job and a paycheck, and you never show up for that job because you're running for another one that now you claim you want. Well, you know, if you really want it that bad, have the integrity to resign from the one you currently hold and go run for the other one. But don't just let the taxpayers pay for you to be a candidate. I find that very offensive and off-putting.
It's kind of like dating. You should probably break up before you start dating somebody else.
What a perfect analogy.
I know you were just thinking about that, you know?
No, but I'm going to steal it from you. And next time I ever talk about this, that is exactly the perfect analogy for this.
Okay, so how launching a presidential campaign, was it once again, did you feel the churnings in your heart to go and to make this decision and to make that step? Like, where does that come out of? Is it easy or is it hard?
It's very hard to get in. Here's what surprises most people.
How many people were running at the time when you were running?
Oh gosh, in 2008, I think we started with 15 people.
A whole lot. Wow.
It was a pretty full filled. And, I was not one that everybody thought, oh, he's the front runner, because that was the year that you had Fred Thompson, Rudy Giuliani, John McCain. Gosh, I'm trying to remember all the different
I don't know
people.
who any of those people are.
Mitt
I just know
Romney.
who Mike Huckabee is.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Great. You should run for office, David. You're good. You're good at this. But I think it was a matter of, I knew it was a risk and I knew it was a long shot. And I ended up coming in second to McCain in the Republican primary. So, I outdid the expectations. But politics, there's no prize for second place. There is no red ribbon. It's blue or nothing. You either win it or you lose it. And that's the unfortunate. But I was going to say that as hard as it was to get in, and that's a tough decision, something I understand that most people, even now who are talking about the process, will not understand. It is even harder to get out of the race. It's harder to drop out. Even when people are saying, hey, you can't win, there's no point you staying in, why don't you drop out? Why don't you get out? Part of the reason you don't is because it was an enormous heavy lift to get in. You've given your heart, your soul, you've laid it all on the line to run. And you don't just casually wake up one day and say, I think I'm done. You can't just walk away. You now have dozens of people that are working for you in the campaign. They've joined you in this vision. And you know that you're going to break their hearts. You have people who have contributed to you. You're going to break their hearts. You're going to break your own heart because you're going to acknowledge that it isn't going to happen. And it's tough to do that.
Was it also, I don't know much about running for president. I know this is odd, but I've actually never run for president.
Maybe you should.
Did you have the whole idea, like when you're running for president, how much is that spotlight on your family also? Are they digging up all kinds of stuff, running terrible ads, against you, saying your beard is terrible? By the way, if you have not seen Governor Huckabee's beard, it's amazing. You should go to our YouTube right now and check this out. Also, because there's many, many reasons to watch this on YouTube, for the record, but we'll get to that later. All right. So, did you have all that spotlight in all those different areas, and was it uncomfortable?
It's very painful. People have no idea. And, as the candidate, you expect it and it's coming, but you don't realize how bad it is until you're in the middle of it. What really is hurtful is when people lay it on your family and your children. I think having been a governor for as long as I was, that's a very hot, white light spotlight that you're in, prepared me better than some people even running for president, but it's still difficult. And I think the hardest part is not the things they say about you that may expose some of your flaws, because those are true. And you say, yeah, that's who I am. It's when people make up stuff that is utterly false. Because if you say that's not true, people say, yeah, he's lying. And sometimes you almost want to just confess to something you didn't do, because it's easier than trying to deny it. I know that sounds weird, but it's very tough on a family. And I was very mindful, my kids, how would they handle this? And I was so blessed. I'll never forget my daughter, who ended up with a political career of her own, was asked by a reporter, I think it was from the New York Times, how it was growing up in the shadow of a governor and presidential candidate. She said, there were hard times. There were times it was not fun to read stuff about your parents or even about oneself. But she said, I got to do a lot of cool stuff because my dad was governor. I met some amazing people that I never would have met. And she said it balanced out. And I'm glad I got to do the things I did, and it was worth it, because otherwise I wouldn't have experienced those things. And I thought, what a blessed perspective. And it just relieved me so much to hear my daughter, the youngest of my three children, affirm that it didn't ruin her life. It, in fact, had given her a real foundation. And she learned from it, she grew from it, she benefited from it, and she celebrated it. That was a blessing.
Did your other kids go into politics as well?
Not in the sense of running for office. All three of my children have been very interested in politics. They're very active, usually helping other candidates or working. My oldest son works in state government. My middle son has his own business, and he is an entrepreneur, but he's very involved in political stuff as a contributor. He helps run my PAC, Huck PAC, that gives candidates money for their campaigns. So my whole family is very politically active. And quite frankly, I didn't care whether they were political or not. That was never something I pushed them to do. But the one thing I really prayed was that I didn't raise kids who ended up rejecting everything that I stood for. And so what I'm more grateful for than that my daughter became governor, or that my oldest sons, are active in their own way, it's that they have very similar values and principles on things like the sanctity of life, the role of government, respect for the Constitution, the rule of law. There are things that they have embraced on their own that really affirm that what they grew up with is what they could accept as adults. And that is the great joy I have.
Have you ever wanted to write a parenting book on how to do this? Because I have three that are still in school, in grade school, in high school, and to try to figure that out.
It's tough, and there's no guarantee. I have friends who raised their kids better than I raised mine. They really were terrific fathers, and their spouses were great mothers. And they ended up with great challenges, and you just don't know. There's no way, no guarantee, because people are individuals. They'll make their own decisions. You just pray, and even if they make some bad ones, and along the way, my kids, they didn't make all great decisions.
Are you going to tell us what Governor Sarah Huckabee, what some of the non-great decisions that she made growing up, like when she was 12?
Hers were pretty good. It was. I'd say that raising boys is a lot harder than raising girls. Sarah and I never had a cross word, even through her teenage years when she and her mother were clashing. Mothers will say that having a daughter is much tougher than a son, and most fathers will say having a son is much tougher than having a daughter. Especially between the years of 13 and 18. And I remember that great quote by Mark Twain.
Yes, I love that quote.
Who said that when a kid turns 13, put him in a barrel, nail the top shut, and cut a hole in the side of the barrel and poke his food through it. And when he turns 16, cover the hole.
That's a different quote than I was thinking of the one when he said, how your son thinks you're smart until you're his hero, and then when he turns 16, 17, he thinks you're the dumbest person on the planet, and then around 21, 22, he's like, you know what, my dad wasn't as dumb. He was pretty smart. Yeah. That whole thing. There's a better way.
The old man learned a lot in a short period of time, right?
Exactly. The old man learned a lot. All right, so you're on. There's never enough time on this thing because there's so many pages here that I would love to get through and and ask you questions about. But I'm abbreviating, so I have to. This. You have a show on TBN right now, which is incredible. How many years are you in on your show now?
We're in our 7th season.
Wow,
it's hard to believe. It doesn't feel that long, but it's just been a joy.
What night is this on TBN?
It's on Saturday and Sunday night on TBN, and Newsmax runs it on Sunday as well. So
nice.
It's good exposure. It's also online, Facebook Live. There's a lot of different ways people can see it.
What's it called? Besides, is it just Huckabee?
Yeah, it's a real original name. They worked real hard in the marketing to figure out what are we going to call this. And
is this why you quote Mark Twain too with the name Huckabee?
I think it has to do with that, of course, absolutely. And he's a funny guy. And a brilliant guy. So I love quoting some of the great Mark Twain comments.
Okay, so your show, 7 years now, you've been doing it. How many episodes have you done at this point?
We're at 337.
Wow.
comes every week.
And if you've never, by the way, out there, if you've never watched his show, it is incredible. Not to mention all the other late night talk shows. Just you could throw all those out and just catch up and watch all of Huckabee. Because you have an amazing guests. We were talking the last show that I was on with you had Meatloaf.
Yeah.
Which was his last, right? One of his last performances?
His very last public performance. He passed away just a couple of months afterwards. And of course, none of us knew that was about to happen. But it was such a seminal moment for us. But for him, he had not been on the stage in 6 years. He had been battling a lot of health problems. And he was nervous about, being back on the stage. Could he still do it? And as you remember, he nailed it. It was amazing. Yeah. He's such a fun guy. I loved him and broke my heart when he passed away. But I was also glad that he didn't just sort of fizzle out and, after 6 years of having struggles with health, never went back on that stage. He went back and had one of the great performances of his life before he came to the conclusion. And I think
it was incredible. I didn't know much about Meatloaf until that day when I went on your show and then met him and took a picture with him and hung out in his green room while you were out working.
What a great guy, so much fun.
Unbelievable. So when you have to get your guests, right? Because you obviously have had a lot of guests and 300 and some episodes. Do you have an unbelievable talent booker for you who comes to you and says and shows you a list and says, "Who do you want on here?" Or do you hand call all of them? By the way, I didn't get a call from Governor Huckabee. I don't even know why.
Oh, we begged you to come. That's what it was. It's a group effort. We have booking producers for the show that help book. People are pitching guests to us all the time, maybe an author.
Are some of these people that are working on the show, have they worked with you over the years in different facets in your different jobs?
Some have. Some I knew from when I did a show at Fox News Channel. Others have been TBN people, or maybe I didn't know them, but they were known by other people who work on the show. So we had an opening, but we have a great group of people. Yeah. Our whole team, we really genuinely like each other. And there is an extraordinary esprit de corps and camaraderie among all the people who are on the staff of our show, which makes it so much better and more fun to have that.
Well, clearly it starts at the top with you, and then it, I would imagine, trickles down to everybody else. All right, so... Yeah. They're always like, hey, by the way, you're getting ready to wrap up here. All right, so you're on, I have to ask this, because you go on Fox, and you had your show on Fox for many, many years. How is this? Like, how often are we on Fox?
I still do Fox appearances almost every single day that I'm traveling.
How did they book this with you? Does somebody call you? Does your agent call you? And say, hey, you're going to be on at 4 o'clock in the morning, 6 in the morning, then you're going to be on at 3 p.m., and you're doing Hannity at 8 p.m. How does this work?
The booking producers for a Fox show, and each show has their own producers, their own bookers, and they'll call. Sometimes they'll email. It may be a few hours in advance. They'll say, can you do 4 o'clock this afternoon? And they may call and say, can you be on 2 weeks from Wednesday? So it just varies, and a lot of it they do pre-planning, and I'll book a week.
Do you run your own calendar? Or do you have an assistant constantly saying, "Hey, Mr. Huckabee, you have to be on this"? By the way, in 20 minutes.
I pretty much do my own, and the reason I have too many universes because I have, the TBN show. I have a speaking schedule that I book through a speakers bureau. I'm an author. I've written 14 books. So I have a lot of different things. I do have an assistant, but I don't try to have her do all of the scheduling because, quite frankly, it's quicker and more efficient if I just deal directly and somebody says, can you be here at 4, rather than they call an assistant, then the assistant calls me, then I call the assistant back, the assistant calls the person back. If you can cut out some steps, it's quicker, easier, more efficient, fewer mistakes.
I mean, I was amazed, when I was sitting there on when we were shooting God's Not Dead, In God We Trust, the 5th installment, and I said, will you come on the podcast? And you're like, okay, here's my email, and here's my phone number. Of course, I had your email and your phone number, but I let you write it all the way out on a piece of paper just because I wanted to see Mr. Huckabee.
If I would really give you the right
exactly.
one.
I was going to compare it like this. I wanted to, and then I was amazed where you're like, just call me directly or email me directly and we'll set it up. And then I was wondering, even this morning when I said, I wonder if Governor Huckabee is going to be, coming on this podcast because, he set it up himself, whether he was going to show up or not. And you did, clearly. Maybe it is better. It's an interesting thing because I had an assistant for many years. I still kind of have my sister as my assistant now on my booking travel. But I try to book my own things as well to the best, and I have some other people that kind of help too. But I wonder if that is the best way. In all your years, have you found it's just better if you try to run it yourself?
It has been for me. Now, when I was governor, I had a scheduler, I had several, in fact. And there were too many things coming in all the time. And, the Speakers Bureau, they'll field the request for speeches and events like that, and then they'll present them to me. But then I'll ultimately be the one that will say yes or no to it. But a lot of media appearances, it just works better for me to be the person that is contacted directly, and I go right back to the person and say yes or no. Because most of the time in television, they need to know right now. Because if you can't do it, they got to fill that slot.
Are you one of the few people that they can actually call direct? You have
Probably
to be.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people.
Which is why you're probably on it every day.
It may be because they can't get a hold of somebody and said, we can't get anyone good. Get Huckabee. He'll do it. And that's how.
Okay. So you're a musician as well. We haven't even dug into that yet. How often do you get to play on your show? Do you play on your show every night, or is it?
Pretty much every week, yeah. When
Nice.
we have guest artists, like last week we had Dave Mason. Amazing. I mean, that was so cool to play with him. He's played with Jimi Hendrix, and he was the originator of the band Traffic and written all these great songs, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But, I've played with Dionne Warwick, Leonard Skinner, Alabama, Toby Keith, Willie Nelson.
Did you lead worship when you also played back in the day when you were the pastor? Did you get out there?
I'm mostly a rock and roll guy. I have to say, I do play in my church praise band. I'm on the rotation. I don't play every week. We have 3 or 4 bass players that play, and I'm in that rotation, and I enjoy that. But I'm mostly blues, rock, and country. I had to really learn how to play more, I would say, church music. Now, I loved contemporary Christian music back in the Jesus movement days, which was really the transformation of me back in the late 60s and early 70s. That was
Keith Green around that time? I think he was in the 80s, right? 70s,
it was
80s.
more the 80s, but when I was coming along, it was guys like Larry Norman.
Oh, yeah.
Love Song. Later, it would be Petra, DeGarmo and Key, and so many others. But the controversy surrounded the Christian contemporary music because so many people thought it was just horrible. It was using the devil's music. And Larry Norman had one of the greatest songs called "Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music?" I loved Larry Norman. He was such an influence. And he looked like a rock star, and he sang like one, and he wrote like one. But his music was spiritually very powerful and was very instrumental in helping me to kind of stay in the faith and not wander off, because so many people were critical of young Christians who didn't look churchy. And there were a lot of us who didn't want to look churchy, and we didn't want to talk or act churchy. We just wanted to love Jesus. And I think that was the power of the Jesus movement. It was to be Christ followers, but to be comfortable in a culture where maybe the coat and tie didn't really work, if that makes sense.
Governor Mike Huckabee, thank you so much for being here. You have been just a joy and inspiration to talk to today. I really appreciate it. I liked you before, but I really like you now. even more.
I liked you before. I don't like you now, but I did before.
It's understandable.
I've loved getting to visit with you. Having the opportunity to work with you on the just the brief scene for the 5th installment of God's Not Dead was such a joy, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for having me on today.
I got to give you a shotgun. Mike wants to be in an action movie. I'm gonna get you in one.
I'm ready.
I look forward to that, actually. All right, guys, please, if you haven't tuned in, well, I'm sure you tuned in, but obviously we're on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Alexa, every podcast platform. Going right now, and please check into our YouTube channel at David A.R. White, and you could see such amazing people like Governor Huckabee and his unbelievable beard today. It looks better than ever. And also for so many visuals along the way, even as we just had this great interview. So God bless you guys. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.